The next story, which is about reparations. Now, this is interesting. You know, I didn't think Tim Pool and Benedict Cumberbatch would be in the same sentence here, but they are, because both of them have a reparations story right now. If you're not familiar with with Benedict Cumberbatch, Benedict, he's known to us Marvel fans as Doctor Strange. Some of you may know him from other movies. But recently, something came out about his family in reference to reparations. Let's get into that story. Benedict Cumberbatch's family could be forced to pay reparations for ancestors to slaves. This explains the shocking picture of him on the thumbnail, the face I put up there. So that's Benedict Cumberbatch. So let's get into this story here. I was not aware of this, by the way, until someone sent me this article. The family of Benedict Cumberbatch could be forced to pay reparations for slavery after it was revealed he has familial ties to a sugar plantation in Barbados. See this piece right here that I want to point out? This is why, and I don't know if JB's still here in the chat, but we need to talk about this. Sugar plantation in Barbados. There were plantations not just in the United States. Let's go on. The Caribbean nation, which became a republic in 2021, is looking for reparations from the families of past slave owners, and Cumberbatch could find himself in a legal battle over his ancestors owning a plantation in the 18th and the 19th century. So let's go on. According to the report in The Telegraph, Abraham Cumberbatch, the seventh great-grandfather of the Oscar-nominated actor, bought the Cleveland plantation in 1728, which housed 250 slaves for more than 100 years. Cumberbatch relatives reportedly earned the family a small fortune from the plantation. After slavery was abolished in the 1830s, Cumberbatch ancestors and other slave owners were compensated with a monetary amount now worth millions. Let's say this again, you guys. Cumberbatch's ancestors and other slave owners were compensated with a monetary amount now worth millions. This is the point that some people bring up when they say, don't forget, some slave owners actually did get reparations. A lot of people don't know this, but some of them did after slavery was abolished. It was supposed to be 40 acres and a mule, according to General Sherman, at least in the United States. That was actually supposed to go to the free slaves. But instead, some slave owners got reparations instead. Let's go on. Last November, The Guardian reported that the Barbados government had indicated its plans to seek reparations from Richard Drax, a conservative member of British Parliament who inherited the island's largest plantation, Drax Hall. Drax is facing pressure to hand over his family's land if he refuses. Barbados will ask an international arbitration court to decide on the matter. The Drax family had slave ships. They had agents in the African continent and kidnapped Black African people to work on their plantations here in Barbados. I have no doubt that what would have motivated them was that they never perceived us to be equal to them, that we were human beings. They considered us as chattels. That's where the term chattel slavery comes from. If Barbados' challenge is successful in court, it will pave the way for its government to seek compensation from other descendants of slave owners, including Cumberbatch. This is at its earliest stages. We are just beginning. A lot of this history is only really now coming to light. Any descendants of white plantation owners who have benefited from the slave trade should be asked to pay reparations, including the Cumberbatch family. In other words, they're letting Benedict know you are not special, boo. The money should be used to turn the local clinic into a hospital, support local schools, and improve infrastructure and housing. Jesus, and it gets worse. Listen to this part. I forgot he was in this movie. Cumberbatch, who played an enslaver in the Oscar-winning film 12 Years a Slave, has acknowledged his ancestors' slave ownership in the past. He said his role in the 2006 abolitionist drama Amazing Grace was a sort of apology for his ancestry. Pew. The Sherlock star also said in a 2007 interview that his mother once urged him to reconsider using his real name for the fear he would become a target for descendants of slaves looking for reparations. Isn't this something? In 2014, Stacey Cumberbatch, New York's commissioner of citywide administrative services, was asked about her surname, revealing that her ancestors were slaves in Barbados, owned by the Emmy winner's forefathers. Okay. That might be a bit heavy for some folks. But I'm sitting here, and as I was reading this, I'm thinking to myself, like, I should have asked Olamia Lauren to come on because she's from Barbados. Oh, wait, no, she's from Bahamas. She's Barbados or Bahamas? Damn, I forgot. I'll have to ask. I should have had someone come on. If you know someone that's from Barbados, please let me know because I can have them on to come and talk about this. But so Benedict is taking some heat because of that, because that came out. I was shocked. I did not know about that until I saw that article. And so it brings up that question again in reference to reparations. Now, where the debate comes in is that whether or not reparations should be based on lineage or whether it should be based on race. The problem that you run into if you just base it on race, if you say all Black Americans should receive reparations, the problem that you might run into is the fact that the 14th Amendment can actually prevent that from happening, because the 14th Amendment can say, that's discriminatory. If you base it on lineage, that's a different thing. And so if we want to go back to the point about Barbados, see, I wanted to let you guys know it wasn't just plantations in the United States. There were plantations in the Caribbean too. So if you want to go back to Barbados, what some people would probably tell you, and again, I'm not an expert, just telling the story here, but what some people will probably tell you is that technically Britain should pay reparations to Barbados. So it was Bahamas. I got it wrong. She has lineage from Bahamas and Nigeria. Olami. That's what it is. Bahamas, not Barbados. Balls. Sorry. But, and that brings up the Tim Pool issue here, because I'm going to show you this tweet and I want you to tell me if you think Tim Pool is being genuine. So Tim Pool tweeted this out recently. Stop sending U.S. money to Ukraine and use it to pay reparations to descendants of slaves. I'm going to say this again. Tim Pool said, stop sending U.S. money to Ukraine and use it to pay reparations to descendants of slaves. Now, the question that some people are asking, is Tim Pool being genuine? Do you think he's being genuine? We're going to talk about that tonight when you call in to call in. I want to hear your opinion about all of this. But some people may agree with this part. Stop sending U.S. money to Ukraine. I think a lot of us have vented about that, right? But where some people will fall off is when he says use it to pay reparations to the descendants of slaves. I agree with all of this message, all of it. $100 billion has been sent to Ukraine, but they say they can't afford to pay reparations for descendants of slavery. And it's not just that. They say they can't give us health care. It's too expensive. We can't afford it. But you just sent $100 billion to Ukraine. That money been sitting there. If you cut the military industrial complex, we can solve a lot of these things. Now, some people will come in, and this is where they'll ask me, by the way, you need to look at the comments on You need to look at the comments because I don't think Tim's audience was having this. I don't think they were feeling it. Well, some people will come in and say, what about the rest of us? What about people who are poor that are not, a part of that lineage to receive reparations? What about us? What will we get? What do we do? This is the reason why I say it is really important. I wish Andrew Yang would still come back and stress this much more. This is why I think it's really important that you guys need to push for universal basic income. And before people come back at me and they say, no, we can't have that. That's socialism. I want to let you know that Alaska has a UBI, and Alaska is a red state. They get their UBI. I keep saying that. They get their UBI from the oil industry. So, because see, this is the thing when people come back and they tell me that, they're like, that's a socialist thing, and da-da-da. I'm like, Alaska has UBI. So maybe this is something that we have a better chance accomplishing on the local level. These things are happening. I talked to you about programs in Denver, Colorado, and Los Angeles that are actually doing a test run on a UBI for certain participants to see how that works out. Maybe that would be the way to go. I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's going to happen on the national level. Maybe in reference to reparations, maybe that's what may happen, because I don't think it's going to happen on the national level unless you put heavy pressure on the president of the United States. HR 40 has been sitting there for over 30 years. Jim Clyburn was a part of that, right? That's not going anywhere. And HR 40 doesn't offer cash payments based on what I read. Now, you still need those structural changes. You still need to change the system. But you also need to pay people, because there's this gap in wealth. And that's what I want to bring up here, where people need to understand why we need reparations for Black Americans. And there's one piece here that I want to point out that really nails it, because I think some people, they just see this as you're just giving money to Black people. And I don't really understand why, it is. So let me point out one part from here. The average white family has roughly 10 times the amount of wealth as the average Black family. White college graduates have over 7 times more wealth than Black college graduates. Making the American dream an equitable reality demands the same. U.S. government that denied wealth to Blacks restore that deferred wealth through reparations to their descendants in the form of individual cash payments in the amount that will close the Black-white racial wealth divide. Additionally, reparations should come in the form of Black wealth building opportunities that address racial disparities in education, housing, and business ownership. And let me say something really quick here, because people get this one wrong too. This rumor that was going around where people were saying that canceling student loan debt closes the racial wealth gap, it does not. I've mentioned this on this show when people were saying that last year. It does not. The majority of African Americans don't have college loan debt because the majority of African Americans don't have college degrees. The majority of African Americans are getting jobs after high school, not going to college. Yes, the rates have increased over the years where more Black people are going to college. But overall, the majority of Black people don't have student loan debt. So I don't know who started that rumor. I don't like where it came from, but I have to clear that up. I had to jump in and clear that shit up. I'm sorry. That is not true. All right. Now, there's another piece here where they lay out the different categories, the missed opportunities. The first major opportunity the U.S. had, and where it should have atoned for slavery, was right after the Civil War. General William Sherman concluded that each Black family should receive 40 acres. Sherman signed Field Order 15 and allocated 400,000 acres of confiscated federal land to Black families. Additionally, some families were to receive mules left over from the war. Hence, that's where 40 acres and a mule comes from. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. That's why it's not as common for Black Americans to have generational wealth. You get what I'm saying? You don't have property, then you have no property to pass down. So that's important to note, especially then land was valuable. Now, another part here they mention is the New Deal. And I've talked about this on this show as well. A lot of people like to brag about being this FDR New Deal Democrat. But I like to remind you that the New Deal heavily left out African Americans. And people don't want to hear it, but it's true. I've done the research on this. So that's another thing. Two particular policies of the New Deal fell short on redressing America's racial wrongs: the GI Bill and Social Security. Though white and Black Americans fought in World War II, Black veterans could not redeem their post-war benefits like their white peers. While the GI Bill was mandated federally, it was implemented locally. The presence of racial housing convents and redlining among local municipalities prohibited Blacks from utilizing federal benefits. White soldiers were afforded the opportunity to build wealth by sending themselves and their children to college and by obtaining housing and small business grants. That's important. But that wasn't the part I wanted to show you as well. Oh, the anti-Black policies. And if I don't find it here, I know it off the top of my head. I forgot how long this article was. I'm sorry. Eric, can you put the link to this article in the chat? Because some people might want to read this, because they even talk about who should receive reparations. And then, oh, I lost it. It must have been towards the top. There was a piece here that listed all of the things that, when they talk about slavery. Here it is. All right, this piece right here, because a lot of times when you say reparations, people think that you're just talking about slavery. It's actually not just about slavery. Here are some of the issues that are brought up. Slavery, Jim Crow segregation, anti-Black practices like redlining and other discriminatory public policies in criminal justice and education have robbed Black Americans of the opportunities to build wealth, defined as assets minus debt afforded to their white peers. So there's a difference between net worth and income. Your net worth is what you own minus what you owe. If you don't have generational wealth, it's going to be difficult for you to get ownership. Not saying you can't get there, but it's going to be more difficult for you to get it. And then in order to get that wealth, if you're going to go to college and get higher education so that you can get those positions that's going to give you that wealth, 9 times out of 10, if you're coming from a generation that has no wealth, you're going to have to take out student loans. Now you have debt. So your net worth is what you own minus what you owe. If you owe a lot, but you don't own shit, your net worth is in the negative, boo. So this is something that's important for people to really hone in on. Net worth is very much important. Now, if you think that this is not an issue today, it still affects people today. And I'm going to show you with an example here in my place, Boston, Massachusetts. Even we had this issue. People like to say we're progressive and everyone's so free and no one cares about race or gender or sex up here. That's not true. We have systemic racial issues as well. Now, this came out a couple of years ago because the Boston Globe did a study about race in Boston. That was no typo. The median net worth of Black Bostonians is $8. Some of you heard me talk about this probably multiple times on this channel. I do have new subscribers now, but I want people to understand how important this really is. This was actually highlighted in the Globe's Spotlight series on race in Boston, and the $8 is 100% real. The median net worth for non-immigrant African-American households in the greater Boston region is $8. For white families, it was around $250K. And I want to point something out. Notice they say non-immigrant African-American households. Why is that important? Because the households, the immigrant African-American, the immigrant African households, 9 times out of 10 weren't descendants of slavery in the United States. They came here by choice. Most of them came, people I know here that are Jamaican, people that I know here that are Haitian, they came here by choice. They weren't born here. So that's why it's important that they point that piece out. This study was done about non-immigrant African Americans. $8. Now, how could that be? Let me explain to you how this works. Let's go back to white flight. For those who are not aware, white flight was a period when white families left the cities and moved to the suburbs. Some people said flee to the suburbs. They moved to the suburbs. Here's where the problem came. Because of redlining practices, Black families that did have the means to leave the city and to move to the suburbs were kept out, almost like a gate around those communities that kept Black families out. Now, how did they do that? The banks wouldn't give them loans, even when they could have. So what you have to understand is that for most of the Black families during white flight, they were kept in the urban areas. They were kept in Chicago. They were kept in the Bostons. They were kept in the Phillies. They were kept in the New York cities where they could not move out to the suburban areas. When the white families left the cities, the wealth and money that they had, they took it with them. So when the wealth moved out of the city and moved into the suburbs, and you have public schools funded by property taxes, guess what happened to the education system in the cities? It went down because of lack of resources, because it was underfunded, because property taxes determine how the funding is going to be for public schools. So now you have these schools in the city that actually at one point in time were fairly decent or good. But when the wealth left the city and the Black kids were left and some Latino kids were left in the city, they were left at the under-resourced, underfunded schools, therefore not getting as great of an education, therefore not getting as many opportunities in reference to higher education, therefore not getting more opportunities when it came to professional careers. Therefore, they became stuck in a cycle of poverty that was more and more difficult to get out of. And it's really difficult to own property in these cities. It's expensive to own in New York City, to own in Boston, right? So you don't own anything. Yeah, you live in the city, but they couldn't even move to the suburbs and buy a house. They couldn't even move because redlining kept them out. So those were other things that made it so that Black people were held back. Now, what's one way to fix that? I mentioned to you locally, there are some reparation task force that are happening. Let's hear a little bit about that. Now, this is from the GRIO.
The Boston City Council voted this month on developing a task force to discuss what reparations will look like for Black residents. The proposal will compensate Black families for the city's role in slavery and its impact of racial discrimination over the last century. According to the Associated Press, the task force members will research racial biases and disparities for Black families in Boston to decide what reparations would help the Black community the most. Boston is the latest city to look into reparations. The recent list includes Los Angeles, California, St. Louis, Missouri, Providence, Rhode Island, and Evanston, Illinois.
Okay, so I want to add this here for a second. So Boston is looking into reparations, which given I told you about that $8 versus the 250K, they definitely should have been on that list a long time ago. But Boston is one of them. Los Angeles is another. CJ actually interviewed a woman who's a part of the Reparations Council in California. They mentioned Evanston, Illinois. I have looked into that one. That one seemed like it was more like a housing initiative than it was reparations. But then they also mentioned Providence, Rhode Island, which is another one, highly segregated, big wealth disparities there as well. Like, look, you got to live here to see it and to know it. But maybe this is the way forward. Maybe we have to look at this on the local level. Maybe it can happen faster that way. I want everyone to get this done on the national level. But I feel like you have presidents that don't support it. And even the most progressive candidate at the time, Bernie Sanders, did not support reparations for African Americans, but he signed off on legislation for his people. And I want to be very clear about that. This was something I had against. I did not like that Bernie Sanders did. He was willing to admit to sign off on legislation when it came to reparations for his people, but he did not agree with reparations for African Americans. And that really hit a nerve with me. So when it comes to the leaders in the United States, I don't see any of them wanting to do it. Any of them. So maybe the path forward is to look at it on the local level.